did graduate. I have a degree in biology from Vanderbilt, and should have gone to medical school. But I was a poor chemistry student, and I feared for what organic chemistry would do to me. And it's the toughest course, the first year of med school. And I had a little flying time. This is the only sign that the federal government realized that Hitler was tearing up the world. They put out a little rule that if you had 2 years of college, you could go out to the local airport and get free flying instruction. They paid $6 an hour for the plane and $3 an hour for the instructor. And I would leave anatomy lab, smelling of formaldehyde, and drive out to the air base and fly in a Piper Cub. And I had 11 hours flying time at the end of my senior year. And here came the guy across the campus with a checkboard. He had the name of all those that had done that. This was the only sign that the federal government realized they were going to need pilots. This is before Pearl Harbor. And so I did decide to go to Air Force instead of going to med school. That was, in a way, a wise decision, but it was a grueling decision because the war came along that December, Pearl Harbor. PT, primary flying school, these were plywood aircraft. They were made of wood. And our primary flying school were guys many had never flown before. I had the advantage of a few hours of flying time. They washed out 40% in our first year, in our first primary flying school, Fort Worth, Texas. And then we went on from there to the big building in San Antonio, Randolph Field. And then from there to what you decided to do. Did you want to be a bomber pilot or a fighter pilot? And I chose reconnaissance because, again, the photography. I like the idea of the photo. And we did some practice of that. But I also like the idea that I made the decision. If you're in a B-17, you're part of 8 or 9 guys. And the decision is the entire mission. And I saw enough of that in those guys. They really took it. They were brave. I was sent overseas to England with 10 hours flying time in my fighter plane. 10 hours. They later said you have to have 100 hours before you could be sent outside the States. So we learned slowly. So we got over there with no planes to fly. We were there in England, but nothing to do. And so we got some old beat-up Spitfires that the RAF had abandoned because they weren't up to quality performance. And I learned to fly a Spitfire. And then they said, our men need training. We've got them over here long before they're ready. So I was sent to a Royal Air Force squadron. I was the only pilot sent to this squadron. And they were flying combat missions like tomorrow afternoon. And I got there, and they worked me over for about a week to decide if I knew well enough to fly. And then suddenly I'm a part of the mission. Off we go into the wild, And this is combat with the Germans. This is test by fire in a hurry. And I have great respect for the RAF. They were superior. They taught me a lot. I learned a lot. After 2 months of that, I was called back because we were going to begin getting our own planes, and then this became the preparation for what turned out to be the Normandy landings. But the RAF, they are superior people. It wasn't that big a thing, but what was happening was that the B-25s, remember B-25, twin-engine, marvelous plane, I flew that for a while. It's a great aircraft. But they were coming down the channel to bomb the German submarine pens in that part of Lower France. And we knew where they were, and we were just trying to give the submarine Germans a trouble. And so here come the B-25s down the channel. And so we, the RAF, get a scramble to come protect them so they can make their bomb run. And the Germans, who had an aerodrome right over there on the edge of France, they took off to come up and see if they could get to the B-25s before we got there. But we got there first, and we defended the B-25s, and they made their bomb run and dropped their bombs, and the Germans and we went around just like in the movie. And then we shot them up, and they tried to shoot us up. As soon as the bombers completed their run and turned to go back up the channel, the Germans went home. They didn't want to stay and fight with Spitfires. We would fly 100 miles behind enemy lines, finding out where the Panzer Division was, photographing the bridge. Did we knock it out properly? All this great long line of things we had to do entirely in your brain. You had to look at the map before you took off. You couldn't open up a map in a cockpit to look where you wanted to go next. It had to all be inside your brain. An interesting experience for my brain. But it got pretty easy. Same thing over and over, and you did it well, and so it was. The main thing was to see what was occurring as we moved from Normandy beachhead on to southern France, on to Paris, on to Belgium, on to Rhine Valley. See, I had a front row center seat. Whatever the movement was, we had to fly reconnaissance to see if it would work, and then give support. And then the bombers and the fighters knew where to come in. But we flew only 2 planes at a time. One guy doing the navigation and the photography and the visual searching out, and number 2 man, his entire job was to watch out for German planes, because they didn't like a bit that we were behind the lines and finding out all this stuff. And they would circle like hawk does looking for chickens. Sure enough, they'd be at 6,000 or 7,000 feet, and we're down at 1,500 feet. And they would circle and look, and if they could see us, they'd come diving down to take us apart. And number 2 guy would call, and I was number 1 doing the navigation and all that stuff. He would call out and say, "Bogey's at 4 o'clock," and I would look up, and sure enough, there were 5 or 6 of these guys circling, but they were 8,000 feet or 7,000 feet up, and they couldn't really see us very clearly, and we were camouflaged, and we were being as quiet as possible as we did this work. And if they began to circle around and come on down a little closer, I'd say, "All right, it's time to go home today." We wouldn't stay because the odds of 6 to 2, they'd get you. You might get a couple of them, but they'd get you. It was the best single plane we had for this kind of work. Now, some of my fighter guys and some other planes might have a difference, and that's certainly their right. But the Mustang, with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, it really was both maneuverable, it was fast, it was stable. You could fly it on instruments if you had to, and it just was a superior type aircraft for exactly what we needed to do. It had liquid-cooled engine. You had the problem of somebody shooting and getting something in your engine and putting you out of business, and that happened to me once or twice. But most of the time, we were moving fast enough to where they couldn't hit us. One error, this was the single greatest error, as I got new, younger pilots in who would not listen. What the toughest thing you have is to tell young people what they must not do. That's true in high school. It's true in college. It's true in business. Is it not? You must not fly straight and level. It's like shooting doves. If the dove flies straight and level, you pull your gun through it and fire, you get him. If he flies up and down, it's a windy day and you can't ever get your bead on him, you can't hit him. And our young pilots would come over and they would forget that they must not fly straight and level. They forget to weave in and out like a boxer. And if they got some holes in the plane, that taught them, and they'd not forget. Isn't that ridiculous in a way that they would not listen so carefully? But the fact that the film was Verichrome with a speed of 28. 28, that's right. And no exposure meter. I had to do it entirely by saying, well, that's about 125th of F8, you know. I guessed it every time. And I took those pictures, thanks to Hugh Winget, who gave the films one row at a time with 2 rolls. And you know, I know that Eastman allotted film out. Film was very hard to get during the war years. And he gave Hugh his small little allotment. And he would sell 1 and sometimes 2 rolls to my dear mother. And she would get those and send them overseas to me. And just as I was about to run out of film, here would come another little package from my mother with 2 rolls of film. And I ended up with some 1,500 negatives, all the way from Normandy beachhead to central Germany, and everything in between. Yes, I was very impressed, especially with Belgium. We got to Paris for the liberation of the Paris, and that's a whole other story. That picture over behind me is one example of. The Parisians were truly grateful. Now, they may not be very grateful today, but they were grateful then. And the Nazis had been so harsh to those people. Gosh, they did terrible things. Anyway, I found as I went along that taking the general public, particularly the children, was a great way to measure where you were and what they were like. And I had never seen little children in wooden shoes before. You probably have never seen that. We had a snow or 2 in Belgium. The boys used those wooden shoes as skis and slid down the hills in the little town with wooden shoes. Now, you'd never have thought of that. And I've got some pictures showing them doing that. I was fascinated with the people themselves. And the Belgians, they're great people. They were overrun in World War I by the Germans and again in World War II. And the Germans were very harsh to that little village. And I was a CO, and I had to deal with them. And they were gracious. They were appreciative. Of course, they were so glad we'd run the Germans out. Well, the main thing about the photographs was that it really did document the people. The people I came across, the civilians, some of my old RAF guys, and how well they performed and how supportive they were of this young upstart of an American trying to fly their plane, so to speak. They were not snooty at all. One of the top pilots in this RAF fighter plane group that I flew with was from Wales. He may have been the best, most expert pilot we had. His father was a coal miner in Wales. And next to him was the second son of Lord somebody or other. You know, the British, they are not high level. They are not snooty. They're a quality people. They saved the Western world. They defeated the Nazis, the Luftwaffe, and saved England. And if they hadn't done that, and we were sitting over here doing nothing, we thought that the Pacific and the Atlantic were protecting us. If they hadn't won the Battle of Britain, we would have had to launch the Normandy landings from New York Harbor. Isn't that interesting? Developing tank. Some of these things you stir in. And I poured in developer and hypo and washed them and sponged them down just like you're supposed to do. But I found in London a photo shop. They didn't have any film, but I just went in to see what they were doing and met this young man, and he said, I have a new developer. If you're developing your own film, you might like to consider this. It was a little bottle. It was, I don't know, about that tall, about that big around. He said, if you dilute this 2 to 1, 3 to 1, you get a very thin developer, and you get a very fine grain from this. And you can make a great enlargement if you know what you're doing. So I bought that little bottle, and I diluted it, and it lasted all the way to central Germany. I ran out just as the war was over, which was very timing, wasn't it? But sure enough, those negatives, which I kept very carefully in, again, a little cellophane folder box that my dear mother sent, I was able to write down where every negative was taken. And they're still solid. They're really very good. And there are some 3 by 5 foot enlargements with no grain. And that's pretty good. And you'll see some if you come to the exhibit.